So if everyone could take their seats, please. Thank you. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce our next session, Current Issues for Regulation in Higher Education. Our presenter, Dr. Mary Russell, and can I also introduce our presenter, Dr. Mary Russell, Acting Chief Executive of TEQSA, and our panel members. Saxon Rice, Chief Executive of ASQA, Professor Theo Farrell, currently Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic and Student Life at the University of Wollongong, but from February next year, Vice-Chancellor of La Trobe University. Bailey Riley, President of the National Union of Students, and Dr. Saraid, Billiards, Chief Executive, the Association of Australian Medical Research Institutes. In this session, we will first hear from Mary, and then we will move to a Q&A session with Mary and the panel, with plenty of opportunity for questions from the audience. So, over to you, Mary.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for your attendance today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of country that we're on today, for their continuing connection to land, waters and community. And I acknowledge the key role of their elders past, present and emerging, including those First Nations people who are with us today. So, I want to pick up a conversation that we started last year at the TEQSA conference. We began a discussion about the importance of provider self-assurance for ensuring the quality of higher education and student experience. Self-assurance, of course, is not new in higher education or to TEQSA's regulatory approach. It's covered in depth in Domain 5 of the threshold standards, but it's relevant across the standards as a whole. Self-assurance is good business and educational practice. It supports strong educational delivery and outcomes. And good self-assurance is absolutely fundamental to the reputation of both individual providers and the sector as a whole. We all have different parts to play. Quality, responding to threats to quality and compliance with the higher education standards framework is the responsibility of higher education providers. TEQSA's role is to provide assurance of that compliance with the standards in ways that are proportionate to and targeted to key risks. However, we're also looking at how we can develop our work to monitor and alert providers to respond to key sector risks. Since the conference last year, we've been updating our regulatory processes to place greater emphasis on the assurance activities that higher education providers are already required to have in place. And today I'll share with you some of the changes that TEQSA is making in our regulatory assessments. Visibility of what's changing is, of course, well, we hope, helpful for you because it will enable you to prepare and leverage off your self-assurance activities to demonstrate that you're meeting the regulatory requirements. So I mentioned last year that the work of a regulator requires a level of scepticism. I've completely missed changing my slides. I do apologise. Let me catch up. Okay. The controller. If there's someone else who has control of the slides, can you advance them one now? Thank you. Okay, I'm glad you don't think that's a bit naff. But the timing is great, isn't it? I mentioned last year that the work of a regulator requires a level of scepticism, or at least some critical questioning. This is especially relevant. Thank you. This is especially relevant when we talk about the quality and self-assurance. When a provider presents for regulatory assessment saying, we have no problems or issues, or we've been doing this for a really long time and we have everything in hand, it must be a red flag to the regulator. It's just not plausible. The business of delivering higher education is too complex for that type of assertion. Higher education is, of course, human-centred, dynamic, competitive and inherently risky. The environment in which higher education operates is challenging and also rapidly changing. Providers know, and we as a regulator expect, that there will be challenges and problems that arise. Risks change over time, critical incidents occur, people in key roles change, and processes that have worked well in the past run into problems. The operating environment throws up unexpected challenges. These are complexities that are inherent to the business of higher education, and a systemic approach to managing for these risks and complexities is needed. When you as a providers use your quality assurance activities to anticipate, identify and respond to issues, it strengthens your performance. Sorry, my screen's just flashing like a strobe light at me now. It strengthens your performance and builds confidence in the systems and processes and leadership of your organisation. So TEQSA will increasingly look to your evidence of the effectiveness of ongoing self-assurance when we periodically conduct our regulatory assessments or compliance activities. So we'll move to a slide now that talks a little bit about evolving TEQSA's regulatory approach. Thank you. At TEQSA, we've been working on developing our regulatory processes to recognise and place greater emphasis on the effectiveness of your self-assurance when we do our regulatory work. This work is part of our commitment in our corporate plan to evolve our regulatory model and practice. At the core is adopting a different way of approaching our regulatory work. Our regulatory assessments are being changed to be less prescriptive. We're moving away from standardised, expansive evidence requirements. Regulatory assessments and our compliance work will increasingly be informed by the analysis of evidence of the effectiveness of your own self-assurance and risk management activities. This is a significant change in TEQSA's regulatory approach. It involves both process change and cultural change for us at TEQSA. For higher education providers, it will also mean changes. There'll be a need to ensure that quality assurance is ongoing and really well evidenced in your business and practices. And changes will be needed in terms of how you prepare for regulatory assessment. But this approach also provides opportunities to reduce the burden of regulatory assessment, be that cyclic regulatory assessment or compliance activities when they occur from time to time. So if we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'd like to talk a minute about what's changed with the example of our re-registration approach. So this is a summary of our previous way of doing re-registration, and I'll call out a few of the characteristics of this approach. Many of you will know firsthand, thank you, many of you will know firsthand that the requirements and processes were essentially the same for all providers and circumstances. It was a one-size-fits-all. The documents and evidence required at preliminary assessment were very extensive and I might even say exhaustive. And that posed a really significant burden on providers in preparation and for our assessment. It also meant that providers tended to approach compilation of evidence and assessment of performance against the standards as something that was done in the lead up to registration, rather than something that really reflected the sort of assurance activities that you undertake as business as usual. It also meant that the assessment process for TEQSA involved very extensive review of the very extensive evidence that you had provided. And some of that, from your perspective and ours, was probably of variable relevance. It necessitated quite extensive use of expert assessment, but without really necessarily making that very targeted to the individual provider's circumstances and issues. And it didn't really provide an opportunity for you to tell the story of your performance and risk and what you had been doing to address those matters as they were relevant in the context. So while we thought assessment was thorough and identified opportunities we thought there were opportunities to better tailor our approach to the circumstances, risks and assurance activities of individual providers, and in doing so to make the process more relevant and more burdensome for less burdensome for providers, but while still ensuring that the assessment was rigorous and meaningful. So we've been working with providers over the last 6 months to trial a different approach. And I'll step you through some of the features of that now. So it might look a little bit the same here, but the new approach is quite different. Key changes include an increased emphasis on self-assurance and introduction of tiered evidence requirements tailored to risks. There's a reordering of the process. So the first engagement we have with providers really focuses on what you tell us about your program and activities in self-assurance and the evidence that you have to bring to us, if required, that substantiates both the focus areas of what you've done, but also the effectiveness and your plans for next steps. So you get a chance to tell us the narrative of where the problems and issues are, how you've been monitoring and responding to those in your practice, what evidence you have to give you an indication about progress or for ongoing gaps, and what you're planning to do about those. Assessment of self-assurance is then the key sort of thing that we look at after that first engagement. And our work is a bit different. So what we're doing is we're looking at the information that you've provided in the self-assurance report, and combining that with information that we have from the annual provider risk assessment and other risk intelligence that we hold. So that might include things that you've notified us of, issues and gaps that have been identified, compliance areas of focus that we have at the time that we've shared with the sector. So we bring together that understanding from what you've told us and from what we know about the provider, and we use that to guide, to really target our request for further evidence. So instead of asking for massive and generic evidence up front, it is much more tailored to the provider's circumstances and risk. But it does mean that some of that happens a bit further into the process, so that will be new as well. The real advantage of this is that we'll allow TEQSA to target the intensity of assessment according to risk and reduce the evidence required for lower risk providers. So there are some advantages of this approach, we think. Provider risk is assessed based on the most up-to-date evidence and information. It involves moving from an approach that focuses on perceived presence of risk to one that emphasises much more the provider's approach to managing risk. It acknowledges that effective risk management is not the absence of risk, but it involves assessing how providers are identifying and actively managing those risks. We've had really constructive and helpful feedback from providers we've been working with in trialling this, and I certainly thank those of you who are in the room who've been part of this work. So, in addition to the changes to our assessment processes, and they do extend beyond re-registration to our other processes as well, we are also looking at how we can evolve our approach to sector risks. Right across the community, I think that we are seeing that expectations of transparency and accountability from institutions are growing. We are really alert to increasing community expectations for TEQSA and for the sector as a whole to be proactive, transparent and accountable in responding to key sector risks. TEQSA is taking a fresh look at how we communicate with the sector about emerging risks and what we expect of providers. So a little bit of what you're going to be seeing changing in TEQSA's approach. We'll be looking at how we can change the ways we monitor and call out sector risks. We'll be looking at how we can better share intelligence with other parts of government and other regulators to do that risk monitoring. We're part of cross-agency responses to key issues, and we expect that part of our work to grow. But we also recognise that this necessitates that we strengthen our communication with our providers about key sector risks beyond the types of sector alerts that we've issued in the past. We're working on how to issue clearer guidance about our expectations of providers in the ways that you respond to these risks. And we'll be looking specifically at providers' responses to key sector risks in our re-registration and re-accreditation assessments and in any compliance activities that we conduct. So sector risks really need to be much more central to our radar and your focus in the way that you're looking at risks and responding to them and monitoring the evidence of that in your self-assurance. So I'll run through some of the key risks for the higher education sector at the moment. So many of you were here yesterday and participated in some of the work that is ongoing about academic integrity, including generative AI. That's moving so rapidly that it will remain a key risk that needs quite collaborative and dynamic responses. Another key area of sector risk that is of concern to us and more widely is the underpayment of wages, especially in arrangements with casual staff. Management and oversight of education agents is receiving, with good reason, some increased attention in the wider community. Prevention and response to sexual harm is a key area of risk where strengthened responses are going to be needed from us all, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. And assuring the quality of third-party delivery and the risks of exploitation of Australia's visa arrangements are also really live issues across government and for our sector. So I want to talk about two different aspects or two different parts of your work around self-assurance. Provider risk management and self-assurance are absolutely critical. In keeping with the requirements of threshold standards, self-assurance is not something that should happen only in the lead up to re-registration or re-accreditation assessment. It needs to be embedded and ongoing and tailored to the circumstances of each individual provider. This is work that needs to be part of your business as usual. And you can see here some of the features that we would expect to see in this part of your work, that it's really systematic, that you've done some work to make sure that your risk management and your quality assurance activities are focusing on the key risks and emerging issues that are relevant to you, your students, and the type of education that you provide. I will call out specifically that we recognise that the type of benchmarking and external perspective that's important for quality assurance is not just limited to external referencing. That's an important way of doing some of this work, but equally engaging with your students, really effectively gathering and using student feedback or other benchmarking activities might be important. And I would call out here, for example, professional accreditation, which is sometimes seen as a burdensome extra in higher education, is actually a really important form of external referencing that can support your activities and your evidence in these areas. As I said, we expect to see full cycles of these activities ongoing. So that involves monitoring, review and improvement, and strong and active links with academic leadership and corporate leadership and oversight. So that's the routine embedded work that we expect to see evidence of. But the other thing we expect to see picked up in your risk management and assurance activities, and we recognise this as an area of development for some, is really how you're using those activities to respond to emerging concerns and sector risks. And this may involve a range of different activities for you. Assuring your systems and processes are appropriately aligned to new or unexpected risks. Taking a fresh look at things when these issues emerge or become a focus, or when you receive advice from TEQSA, or you just start seeing a lot of commentary in government and in media about these risks. Many of you attended the seminars yesterday on rethinking assessment in the age of artificial intelligence and contract cheating detection and deterrence. Some of the key themes in these sessions included the importance of deep and ongoing work to reform assessment in order to be able to make trustworthy judgments about student learning in the era of generative AI. Over time, the strategies put in place to manage these risks will need to be subject of ongoing monitoring and assurance activities. It's important to recognise that emerging concerns can also be driven by changing community expectations. We'll talk in a moment about how expectations are changing around what providers need to do to respond to the risks of sexual harm. So I'd like to just pick up a couple of examples and look in a bit more depth about what we might expect to see. So I want to acknowledge at this point that sexual harm is a key sector risk. It's one where community debate and accounts of victim survivors and the work of advocacy groups have brought focus to why victim survivors have felt let down by universities and by TEQSA in the past. I want to acknowledge that this is a significant issue across higher education, and the intensive work that has been undertaken by advisory and working groups to look at what is needed to more effectively respond to these issues. TEQSA welcomes this work, and we're working with the Department of Education to support these initiatives, as we want to see a higher education sector that is a safer place for all students and staff. Minister Clare made it clear this morning that much more is expected of the sector. The work that will be required is substantial and long-term. A draft action plan has been released for consultation. I won't attempt to summarise that comprehensively now, but I would call out that it's absolutely essential reading for everyone in higher education to understand what how some of the work is being conceptualised and start to think about what that will mean in your own organisation. What I will say is that the time to reignite your work on this issue is now. So I'll call out some of the aspects that are especially relevant in that draft action plan for our discussion today. Amongst other initiatives, it foreshadows a national code which stipulates the requirements of providers, including a National Higher Education Code, this is the name of it, a National Higher Education Code to prevent and respond to gender-based violence. And this will set out requirements for embedding the whole of institution approach with rules and expectations for providers, including embedding evidence-based primary prevention activities and respectful relationships education, critical incident management, reporting and response handling, including prioritising student and staff safety and agency in these processes. The need to reflect on whole of institution and embed that in providers' strategic documents and governance arrangements. Requirements to explicitly consider and address the needs of different student and staff cohorts, in particular LGBTIQA+ students, international students, First Nations people, people living with disability and higher education research students. The provision of student support and academic adjustments, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. There'll also be expectations about whole of institution data collection and transparent reporting. And it will be expected that providers engage with sector-wide opportunities for improvements in performance, transparency and accountability. So while this is still in draft form and there will be a period of consultation, the commitment across government and the expectation of the community is strong. And the time to start looking at how you're tracking on these issues is now. Self-assurance activities will be critical for your internal assurance and governance requirements, as well as for meeting external accountabilities. While the detailed work is still being developed, we expect providers to be engaging with the proposed approach and applying self-assurance approaches to assess your organisational readiness, the robustness of your existing arrangements, and where you're going to need to make improvements. Leadership has been called out as an absolutely key expectation for this work. How are you tracking on that? Another area that I think is ripe for really early attention in your assurance activities is to take a deep dive into academic adjustments. How clear is it the sort of adjustments and supports that may be required for students who've experienced sexual harm? What are the hurdles for them in actually seeking support or having appropriate adjustments made? Do they have to tell their story over and over again to people who don't have particular skill in listening, recognising or making an assessment of what adjustments are needed? Or have you looked at ways to make sure that that can be made seamless? Like I say, this work should not wait. The Minister has made it clear today that expectations for the sector will be to take a systematic and strong approach and be very action orientated. So your self-assurance work here should be taking stock of where you are now and where some of the work needs to be developed. Let's look at another sector risk. Third-party delivery is an important part of the delivery model for higher education providers in Australia. Higher education providers are the risk owners in third-party arrangements. You're responsible for ensuring that the arrangements and delivery by third parties are compliant with the threshold standards, but also with your own organisational policies and standards. TEQSA provides a range of guidance materials to support registered higher education providers in assuring the quality and compliance of third-party delivery in both onshore and offshore arrangements. Many of you will recognise these in the Transnational Toolkit and the guidance note on delivery with other parties. However, we're certainly seeing that there's concerning evidence from across the sector that some of the risks are not being well managed. Key concerns for TEQSA about third-party delivery include the lack of clear information provided by registered higher education providers to their students when a course or a portion of a course is being delivered by a third party. Without such clarity, it's difficult for students to make informed choices about enrolment or to know when and how to raise concerns about delivery. Lack of systematic monitoring or oversight of third-party delivery arrangements by some providers and their governing bodies is also an issue. In some areas, there tends to be a set and forget approach to this, and it needs more active attention. We also see variable management of risks to academic quality, including potential departure from delivery of the stated curriculum, how you're ensuring risks to academic integrity are managed by third-party providers, effectiveness of grade moderation and the potential for grade inflation, the expertise of teaching staff and the support available to students outside of set class times. These are areas that are flagging in our work as not necessarily being well managed and needing more attention. Another area is the additional risks when outsourcing of core teaching and learning activities occurs to non-registered entities as a means to reduce costs with consequent impacts on the quality of student experience. Essentially, when you're outsourcing to a body that is not a registered higher education provider, the onus is even greater on you to make sure that that compliance with the standards is strong and that your own policies and requirements are being met. So the strength and detail of contractual arrangements with third-party providers are absolutely essential for effective management of risks and responding to shortcomings. Some of the key areas of focus for your own assurance activities might include what are third-party providers' responsibilities and how well have we set these out for teaching and learning, library facilities, out-of-class time support for students, monitoring student progress, moderation, identifying and managing students at risk. How do we know these are being met? How do we assure ourselves that we're satisfied? Who will manage the assessment and provision of arrangements for students who need additional academic supports or adjustments? How confident are we about how this is being managed? Who will manage student complaints, appeals and so forth if the third-party provider assurance for compliance of this is not clear, then it's an area that clearly needs attention. And is this being managed in a way that's compliant with not only the standards but with your own policies and practices? The fact that arrangements with a third party have been in place for some time does not mean they should be left to sit. They need to be subject to regular scrutiny. So I guess some questions for you are, do you need to strengthen the routine monitoring of these arrangements and performance? How strong are your controls to manage these risks? How strong are your contractual arrangements? Do key risks require auditing or other detailed assurance? This is a key issue and one where we'd expect to see active oversight and accountability driven by senior executives and visibility for the governing body. There's an obligation on higher education providers to plan and manage the risk for compliance in third-party arrangements. And you can expect that from TEQSA, we'll be asking about these arrangements and how you assure yourselves that the risks are being effectively managed. So, this is not as obvious as the red flag, is it? I was actually going to include a slide that had a picture of a really beautiful rosy apple on the outside and one that didn't look so good on the inside. But they were awful. I didn't want to show them to you after morning tea. What I really want to pick up here is that we need you regularly to be looking beyond what's happening on the outside and assuring us that you're taking that deep dive, you're checking whether things are okay under the surface. You have really strong assurance at this. I said at the beginning of the presentation that asserting that everything is shiny and rosy is not reassuring to a regulator. Call me a little bit cynical, but it's part of our responsibility. But self-assurance is a key tool for higher education providers to systematically look below the surface and respond effectively to things that are not tracking well and to respond to emerging risks and issues. In fact, what provides us with reassurance and what provides your governing bodies with reassurance is not the absence of problems, it's how well you're identifying them through your own routine measures, responding to them in a timely and effective way, keeping an eye on them, making sure that what you're doing is effective and is delivering improvement over time. That's what's reassuring to me as a sceptical regulator. Okay. At a minimum, that might mean a review of your risk management and assurance arrangements to make sure that you're targeting the most relevant risks. For other providers, it might mean more comprehensive reviews and developments of your approach to risk management and self-assurance. But for all providers, there's an opportunity to make sure you're collecting evidence that your own organisational governance and assurance arrangements are demonstrating that you're meeting your regulatory obligations. And your success in doing this is really what's going to make a difference to how much we can pick up on those things when you have contact with us for re-registration, re-accreditation or compliance activities. So we think this is both the right thing to do and the right time for TEQSA to move to regulatory approaches that place greater emphasis on these processes to ensure quality in Australia's higher education sector. Thank you.
Many thanks, Mary, and keep with the apple metaphor, and I'm glad you didn't do the worms. Plenty of food for thought. So now we're going to open up for questions, a Q&A session. So while you're all thinking about your questions, I've already done some Dorothy Dixes for our panel. So I'm going to ask each of our panel members a question to get some more thought into this, and then I'll have plenty of time still to open up to the floor for more questions. So first to you, Saxon. ASQA, like TEQSA, has also been on a journey to refine its regulatory approach with a greater emphasis on self-assurance. What do you think are some of the key characteristics of mature provider self-assurance?
Thanks, Adrienne. And actually, Mary's done a really good job of outlining that already, and not surprisingly, there are many similarities with where I think I'll touch on. And I say not surprisingly because I know that we've both been on a path together in really looking at this from equally a best practice perspective, but obviously also the ways in which we can ensure that we have common approaches and a common understanding and all of those things, notwithstanding the work that we've both done across our respective sectors in order to inform the way in which we're approaching self-assurance. But I think the key word is systemic, and Mary, you touched on it in terms of being embedded and ongoing. It is essentially about how you govern your business and how you proactively do so to ensure quality outcomes. So I think the key aspects from ASQA's perspective is really about you having those effective systems and processes in place that really support you to know where your pressure points are, that enable you to effectively identify your risks and where you might be falling short in meeting your obligations, that you embrace this in your business, and you're likely in that respect to be proactively conducting your own audits. And I think there's an element of that that's obviously needing to ensure, and Mary touched on this too, about that is right-sized for your business. But it really is that embracing to understand that We too bring that healthy scepticism to any provider that suggests that everything, there are no red flags, everything is rosy. We're looking for that embracing to go beyond, as Mary said, beyond the surface. Because what we want from that is that you use that information then to put in place strategies to address any issues, to address any risks, that you're evaluating and ensuring continuous feedback loops so that you can really understand your performance and how effective you've been, which is essentially your continuous improvement plan. And for those of you that have engaged with us more recently, you might have been asked for your continuous improvement plan, because it's that part for a provider with mature self-assurance where you are striving well beyond just meeting your compliance requirements and really focusing in the space of excellence. And I think the other key component here, Mary touched on this too, is, or it's perhaps an extension of the feedback loops, is that you're actually going to proactively engage with ASQA or TEQSA or your funding authority about how you're understanding all of that, and whether that is, I think from our perspective, and I know that I've had conversations with providers outside of their cyclical re-registration or any kind of application, where they have been able to work through some of these issues and have identified these issues and they want to engage with us about those. That actually really helps us to, or supports our understanding of the level of trust and confidence we then are able to have in providers and that maturity of the engagement that we continue to have with you. And I'll just touch on two perhaps practical examples of that, or what that might look like. And many of you will know that we have recently implemented enhanced fit and proper person requirements. Those requirements extend now beyond CEOs and high managerial agents to any person who exercises a degree of control or influence over the management or direction of an RTO. So we are absolutely going to be expecting that you have systems and processes for ensuring that not only anyone you recruit to positions of management or control, but also those currently within your business are and remain fit and proper persons. So there is going to have to be that ongoing component of your internal governance where you're ensuring that you've got the systems to assure yourself of those obligations, and then you're actually going to be managing that risk for a broader cohort of staff. And that is not just in relation to people at a point in time, but as I say, that people remain fit and proper. So that actually then also goes to your systems for assuring the legitimacy of the issuing of qualifications and who's doing that. The systems for understanding and managing conflict of interest, or your overall systems for managing integrity across your business. And perhaps just slightly more operational, I think we would also expect you to have systems and processes in place to be proactively seeking feedback from students. You'd do that for a variety of reasons, but particularly in terms of improving the student experience. So we'd expect you to have those systems to be able to support you to know and understand where you might be falling short, whether that's in relation to your practices at enrolment or practical training, or even the support that you're providing a student throughout their training. We'd want you to understand trend data so that you can know whether you're doing better after an intervention. And we'd also expect that you're able to use that information to outline a strategy for yourselves, but also potentially for us, that you are intending on prioritising A, B and C, and you're doing it for these reasons. You've determined it through this consultation process, that you bring a real maturity to understanding what the information's telling you. And as I say, that you proactively engage with us to do that so that we can really understand how you're intending then to measure success. So I think through, the demonstration of a couple of practical examples, it really does come back to that embeddedness and that ongoing assurity through the way you govern your business, the way, and leadership, Mary touched on that as well, of course, to how you undertake all of the work throughout the entire life cycle of any student's journey and the ongoing running of your business.
Wonderful, thank you. So continuing that theme, yes, Theo's grabbing his microphone. Through the Accord process, there's been a lot of issues raised about governance, particularly in the domains of student safety and ongoing concerns about wage underpayments. So in the context of the conversation that we've just had now with Mary and now with Saxon, Theo, you know, as a senior leader of a university, how do you assure yourself and your council that your organisation is fully meeting its compliance obligations?
Yeah, thanks. So the first thing I'd say is I think the prudential regulatory approach that TEQSA is taking is very welcome. And of course, then that puts more emphasis on universities having appropriate quality assurance processes and governance, threshold standards. So I think this is a good direction. And rather than go into technicalities of that, but just one point, very much from a DVCA perspective, because I'm still holding my DVCA hat, one thing which I think is a hidden challenge for universities is systems, legacy systems and systems replacement. So I just say to the regulators, don't underestimate the extent to which universities are severely challenged because we have legacy information systems. We all want to embrace, you know, automation and all the opportunity it offers for true data-rich enhancement of the service we provide and support to students. But we're talking about systems replacements can cost tens of millions of dollars and take many, many years, immensely complex challenges. So there are very significant operational challenges, but nonetheless, we have to embrace them and move forward. I totally agree. But I just want to offer a couple of thoughts around what I also think is quite important, which is cultural. So, and I really like Mary's comment around how, you know, universities are very dynamic, complex communities engaged in a whole range of activities where, you know, there will be challenges and things will go wrong and we'll make mistakes, actually. It's impossible not to. There's 1.5 million students in the sector. We're going to fail some of those students, unfortunately. So how can we do our best, both to try and reduce the incident rate of those failures, but also to respond appropriately? And I think it requires two things. I think it requires us to have a truly student-centric lens in what we do. So I think doing more work around students as partners, embedding students as true partners across our entire governance ecosystem in universities, empowering students to have more voice, listening to students, co-designing with students our policies, co-designing their experiences. All of this will help us do better by our students and empower students to bring forward problems, actually, so we can respond to them. And the other, I think, is universities, and this is, again, part of universities having a culture, a caring culture, care towards students, but care towards each other in our communities. I think it's really important to recognize that we will fail, and that's okay. The key thing is what happens next. So how do we support staff through that process so we can do best by our students? And I think the worst thing you can do is have a culture which is terrified that the regulator will take a really dim view of some failure or some external agency will be, and thereby it won't empower staff to do their best by students. So I think, you know, and I really welcome Mary's comments. We will fail, but the key thing is that we try our best to reduce the incident rate of failure and we respond appropriately with a student-centric lens. And in that spirit, can I just say, I really welcome the draft action plan on gender-based violence. I think framing this in terms of gender-based violence as a societal challenge is incredibly helpful. This is something, obviously, that Universities Australia has recognised itself. And I think UA has done some good work in this. And if you look at the UA guidelines on sexual harm, the 2023 guidelines, there's lots of best practice in there. So trauma-informed, a victim survivor agency, and so forth. But I also think we need to recognise that as a sector, we've not responded with sufficient collective vigour to satisfy key advocacy groups and the government. And so we need to do better. And yes, of course, it's a scourge on our entire society. It's shocking, the incident rate of sexual violence, principally committed by men, is really, truly shocking in Australia, actually. But what I really welcome in the draft action plan is this challenge for universities to lead social and cultural change. So beyond our universities, and I truly believe that universities are not simply engines of scientific progress, but we are also engines of social progress. So I think these are very welcome. I think the National Ombudsman is overdue and very welcome. And I think the new National Code on preventing and responding to gender-based violence is very welcome.
Thank you. So now we're going to hear the student voice on exactly that matter. So, Bailey, I would be very keen to hear your views and the views of students on the very serious matter of sexual harm.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm actually quite surprised by the acknowledgement by Theo and Mary on this issue. I think this is something the sector has had issues coming to terms with for a while. When I started my term of the NUS at the beginning of this year, I think there was still this sense that this wasn't a big issue, we could move past it, it didn't matter. But then it blew up in the face of the university, so now it matters. And I'm glad that people are coming to terms with it. I think it's really just important to acknowledge that this issue has been ongoing for decades. It's not something that's popped up this year, it's not something that's popped up in the past 5 years. It's an issue that students, survivors, and advocates have been fighting for ages. And I'm really glad to see the national draft plan come out yesterday by Jess and Claire. I think it's amazing. The NUS endorses it fully. And I think it's just really important that when we're also talking about the way universities have responded, I think it's also important to acknowledge that universities have all responded in different ways, which is, I think, a bad thing. But through that, we've had some universities who've really empowered student survivors, have really empowered advocates, and properly funded services. But the NUS constantly hears that some universities are doing nothing almost, and some universities are doing the most. And I think that approach echoes what Theo was saying, that it's just not good enough. The sector really needs to have sector-wide response to this that effectively comes together and says, this is what's best for us, this is what's best for the sector, let's do it. And I understand there's different circumstances based on your campus, your locations, whether universities are more online or in person, but it's still really important that the sector gets behind this draft plan. And I think everyone here in the room, it's really important that everyone steps up and speaks out as much as they can. I think the Universities Australia response has not really impressed students in some aspects. I think that the Senate inquiries early in the year, when I speak to students about it, they were very disappointed. I think University of Australia, I'm glad to see this charter come out, but I think this next step has to be endorsing the action plan as a whole. If you want to lead universities and you want to be there for students, you have to also stand and listen to the students with them, as opposed to speaking for them. I think it's really important that, coming together with student groups like the NUS, like End Rape on Campus, like the Stop Campaign, like Fair Agenda, and endorsing this plan is a great first step and would really bring the sector together in a moment where we all need to be together. I think in terms of reporting sexual assault, I think is one issue that really needs to be considered with the Ombudsman. I think it's quite important and it is in the draft plan, but there needs to be responses from universities as well. Once, I'm going to say once because I'm being hopeful, we get this national student ombudsman, I think universities need to come together and promote it heavily, make sure that every student that enters your campus knows about it, every student can access it through your means. You provide students just easy access as possible to make sure that reporting, to make sure that any instance of assault, harm, rape is able to be effectively put forward into the Ombudsman and effectively recognised. I know TEQSA itself tried to attempt this and unfortunately did not succeed in any way. So I think it's really important that the Student Ombudsman is effective and TEQSA supports it through its regulatory abilities, which I'm glad to see is a great focus today. But yeah, I think it's just really important to really stress that it's up to everyone in this room, everyone online, and all universities to come together and support and actively work to prevent sexual violence in our universities. You need to be able to listen to students, you need to be able to work with them, and you need to be able to stand with us when we come to you with these things, when you come to you with these ideas, these plans, as opposed to going, oh, we have something better, we have this thing that we're doing as a university. It's like, no, like you said, let's co-design, let's work together, let's not prioritise what we think's best, let's prioritise what students think works well and try and come together and build that, because that's the only way we get a sense of community on campus. Yeah.
Many thanks. And finally, Saraid, your organisation recently published a very important report, Respect in Research, investigating sexual harassment in medical research institutes, although in reading the report I would say that many of the findings apply to research activities across a range of disciplines and domains. Can you give the audience a brief summary of the key findings, particularly those around leadership responsibilities and the vulnerabilities and risks that can arise given the power dynamics that often exist, the different power dynamics that often exist in research settings?
So look, I think a lot of what I'm going to say has already been mentioned by some of the panel and by Mary, but I think what I would just like to preface sort of my conversation with is that just a reminder that sexual and gender-based harassment and violence is not necessarily the most egregious forms that you see. It can be really, really subtle to those more egregious ones. And so what we're trying to do is educate and train staff, students within our organisations so that they truly understand that what those sort of sexual and gender-based harassment activities look like, because if you can keep those perpetuating, they lead to those egregious ones. And so the idea for this report came about from the Respect at Work that was undertaken by the Australian Human Rights Commission, where there was a focus not only on sort of Australia-wide workplaces to address sexual harassment, but also for specific sectors to actually look at within themselves about, you know, what's going on in their own backyard. And yes, Adrienne, our report is not just for medical research institutes, even though it's was conducted with the focus of medical research institutes, and a lot of the consultation did occur with staff and students within our organisations, but pretty much our recommendations apply across the board. So I just would like to acknowledge that our report was undertaken in collaboration with the Women in Science Parkville Precinct here in Melbourne. And it did go through a significant consultation period of about 18 months to produce the report. And the report came up with 8 key priorities, and sitting underneath each of those priorities are a series of recommendations and useful resources. So what we're trying to do is not necessarily reinvent the wheel, but try to support our organisations to effectively encourage change. And we know that this has to occur in a broader ecosystem. So I'm just going to touch on a few of the priority areas, and one of them is leadership. And really this comes down to what we do know, and the evidence shows that there is a lack of underreporting within our organisations, and it's not just the medical research institutes, this will be the universities and more broader than that. And the underreporting really comes down to a lack of trust, that things won't change, that they won't be believed, nothing will happen, the perpetrators will still remain there. So this is where leadership really becomes a critical factor in ensuring that this trust is built within our organisations. And trust can be as simple as you know, a communication plan from leaders, whether it's the CEO, Vice-Chancellors or other leaders in organisations, acknowledging that sexual and gender-based harassment does occur. It likely occurs in their own organisation, even though they may not have data to show it, but that's because of the underreporting. Being able to say that they are championing a zero-tolerance policy and that they're going to put in place processes and data collection to be able to monitor and track the incidences within their organisations. The other thing that's really important for leaders to be able to create this trust within their organisations is just to be able to normalise the conversation. You know, it's starting to be part of the normal conversation, but it's still a bit taboo. So we need to be able to just treat this as a fact, an unfortunate fact, but let's normalise that conversation, and that comes from leadership. And as I said, sexual and gender-based harassment has a broad spectrum, so we also need to educate within our organisations, and also that comes from leaders, and leaders need to be educated as well, that it can be the small elements of sexual and gender harassment to those most egregious ones that need to be considered. And transparency is key, and that comes from leaders as well. So being able to stand up and take accountability and say that there are issues within an organisation and we are wanting to make change. So just going back to another priority area, which is about that accountability. For those who may not be aware, late last year there were changes that were made to the Sex Discrimination Act, which really puts more responsibility on employers. They've now got a positive duty to ensure that all staff within their organisations, including students, are protected and they have safe workplaces that they go to. So this is a really good switch from moving away from the individual or the victim having to report and having to stand up to the employer now having to set up processes, systems in place to ensure that there is a safety for that individual to report and know that they are going to be believed and heard. In our report, one of the key recommendations is that this accountability needs to fall to the boards, particularly of our medical research institutes. When we undertook a survey of how many of our boards across our 58 members actually received reports on sexual and gender harassment, less than half received that information. This is an easy fix, you know. Easy fix in one way, we do need to gather data and we also have to have systems in place. But providing that information to the board so they then are held accountable to ensure that there's safety for their staff is really critical. Along with this is training. We do need to train our boards and senior executive about how to or understand what sexual and gender harassment looks like, but also train staff who are there as bystanders to help support individuals who are victims of sexual and gender harassment. The other thing we need to consider about sexual and gender harassment is that it needs to work alongside workplace health and safety. So I think everybody understands that, you know, for example, in a lab, you need to make sure that you've got appropriate safety standards to ensure that nobody gets injured. Sexual and gender-based harassment is also a workplace health and safety issue. It can be physical, but more often than not, it is the psychological trauma that occurs, and this needs to fall under that WHS banner. So it's really critical that our workplace health and safety officers are trained appropriately to understand what sexual and gender-based harassment looks like. The other one is diffusing power, and this comes back to the hierarchical nature of our sectors. And this is where we are, as a junior student, junior postdoc, we're very, very reliant on our managers, our supervisors and so forth. And this sort of imbalance really does perpetrate this system of harassment in the organisation. Typically, men do take up the leadership roles, and that's, you know, everybody is aware of that. And we know that particularly in health and medical research, but other areas of research as well, there's a huge psychosocial demand on researchers. You know, there's long hours, very little recognition, the competitive nature of the field. And so it's trying to break down some of those hierarchical structures that really lend themselves to perpetrating the issues that are within our sector. And so some of the solutions that we've proposed is to try to restructure teams where we can, so it's not just one-on-one, so that there is another individual that's part of the conversations, you know, 2 supervisors if you're doing your PhD, for example. Centralised administration and funding for allocation of decisions when it comes to career promotion. So some of these don't require a lot of funding or a lot of resourcing to do. Some do take a lot more, but we can all do something to start making positive steps moving forward. And as the sort of panel really alluded to, you know, while this report is one for AMRI members, it's really more broad. It should be more broadly taken up. We are just part of a broader ecosystem, and there's systemic issues at play. So we need to work universities, MRIs, the funders, etc., and collectively, that's the only way we'll be able to make some change. Thank you.
Thanks, Saraid. Yes, I would recommend that report, even though it is a Respect in Research report. Some of the comments around leadership and some of the comments around power apply to many of our organisations, so it is worth a read. So that concludes the formal part of the session, and now it's open to questions from the audience. And I might stand up because I can't quite see everyone. So roving mics again, and There we go, we're starting. We've got a question down here at the front. I think it might be quicker for me to jump down with the mic. Oh no, here comes someone. Thank you.
Looks like I'm first again. Ian Kimber, independent quality consultant. We heard both Theo and Bailey talk about the need for student, not just engagement, but direct involvement, co-designing, etc., in relation to SASH. But looking at or hearing both Mary and Saxon's presentations about new directions for regulation, it strikes me that we still don't have a very sophisticated way of engaging students in the actual business and processes design of both the regulatory at the system level and at the individual institutional level. So interested in views on that, and Bailey, I guess it's first and foremost one for you.
I think, yeah, I agree. It's been a real struggle, I think, for students for a while to even have a voice. And I think a big part of the past year or two has been the amplification of student voice, especially on campus. I think in relation to co-design, like I don't think I was just referencing sexual assault. I was referencing across the board. Like, I think every policy that you look at, you should have a student look over. Like, you know, if a faculty is designing a policy around this subject, you know, they should have a student there who's done the subject or something else. I think it's really important that that process is happening all the time, and students also just aren't being used for the process and then kicked away. It's like if you want a student to help you co-design something, they should be getting some reward, whether that's credits, whether that's money, you know, like a gift card or something, Woolworths, or like, it's really important that students are throughout that process. I agree that it might be as easy in terms of with the regulator itself engaging students, but I think that's another step forward as well, that I think everyone recognises that across the process there has to be student engagement. And TEQSA, I know, has been quite good this year in terms of student engagement. This is the first university conference I've been to this year that has, you know, more than 10 students too, so I'm pretty impressed. But in general, there's still a bit more, quite a bit more to do, I think, in that governance side of things, and I hope that answers your question.
Actually, Mary, do you want to take it up from the perspective of the student voice in regulation? It just happens. Trust.
I'm not that trusting of the technology. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Look, I think it's a point well made. You know, TEQSA does have routine engagement with key student representative groups and advocacy groups, and we make sure that those groups and representatives also have a chance to be part of consultation, particularly around the policy work that we do. I would absolutely acknowledge that there's more thinking that we need to do about where the opportunities are and how we can best make sure that we get a range of, you know, relevant and diverse student perspectives in the parts of our regulatory work where we can most benefit from hearing that perspective and understanding how our work and our expectations intersect with students.
And I'll just add, from a self-assurance perspective, you know, the value of student voice in provider self-assurance. So just think about that one as well. Now, next question. There's one down the front here. Oh, no, sorry, we've already got the...
Okay. Hilary Winchester, independent consultant. I'm interested in the self-assurance and how that evolving approach might be implemented for initial registration as well as re-registration.
So, obviously there are going to be differences for initial registration because in most, but not all instances, when we receive an initial reg application, it's with a provider that is a new entity, and certainly one that hasn't established maturity in its policies, systems, processes, over a period of time before making its application. What I would say, though, is that the emphasis that we're placing on self-assurance at the time of reassessment, we'll be expecting to see that that is core to the way that providers are planning and preparing their operations and their delivery models. So it's about, the expectation will be evident from early on, but we're not expecting that there'll necessarily be depth of evidence around self-assurance, given that we're seeing people, a provider before they actually have registration and start operations.
I'm just going to throw to Saxon, because ASQA has had some really interesting challenges in this domain, so yeah.
Thanks, Adrienne. And look, I completely agree with Mary, and it is by definition different when we're talking about an applicant rather than an established entity. So, but what we are certainly and currently requiring a demonstration of the approach that will be taken to the governing of the applicant organisation, the way in which they will see themselves in undertaking this work across everything that they do, should they be granted registration. And there is a level of maturity that we're actually seeking at that point in entering the market, because we see it as being so fundamental to delivering quality outcomes ultimately. It is also relevant to why, I think it was in 2018-19, we actually changed our process for initial registration to only grant registration for a period of 2 years initially, and that is in order to enable that the applicant in entering the market to really be able to demonstrate those quality outcomes with a very close registration renewal at the 2-year mark. That remains the case for us, and we're also looking at ways in which there will be value in greater engagement and alignment with the regulator throughout that 2-year period, should the privilege, frankly, of registration be granted to an initial applicant.
Thank you. Now we've got a question down the front, and then I know there's a question at the back.
Thank you all for coming here today for this. My name is Michael Valcheski. I'm a PhD student at the University of Wollongong. I'm also a member of our academic board and the chair of our Student Advisory Council, which is a student board advising the Vice-Chancellor, and of course Theo, who I've worked with for many years as a student partner. And I'll actually note on the first question as well that we actually do a lot of that institutional business level work. I've designed executive and strategic frameworks and strategies and sat on steering committees with Theo. So that is something that is actually starting up in the sector, and I've been personally involved to the point where it's been approved by our council. So my question, and as part of that work, I also sit on an advisory group that oversees our anti-sexual assault and anti-sexual harassment and DV unit at UOW, and one conversation we've often had is the importance of changing culture and behaviour, and that's been a common theme here. So my question broadly to the panel is, what can we do better? And maybe there's some of the strategies that Saraid has mentioned, but what can we do better, not just to change that culture and change behaviour and the thinking of people within our institutions, but also even prior to that? Because a lot of the statistics show us that a perpetrator is often known to a victim long before the action actually happens. So that can also then be students coming in who might affect it. So what can we do then as well to reach out to our communities? Because if we're going to be leaders in social change, not just scientific progress, then of course we need to work more closely with government, community, our local areas. So what can we do to change behaviour over the long term to be leaders in that social change?
Theo, can I throw to you first, because you opened up with culture in your opening remarks, and then other members might also have.
Would you, if it's okay, I'd actually like to listen to some answers.
Sorry?
I'd like to listen to other people's answers, because I'm not an expert in this, so I need to learn. And I'm very interested in Saraid's comments, because you've done the study that I think addresses a lot of these issues. So if it's okay, I'd like to refer to you.
Look, I think it comes back to some of the points I raised earlier about the conversations and normalising the conversations. You know, it's something that is happening in our sector, and now is the time, as Mary was saying, to actually act upon it and not bury our head in the sands. And some of the federal government legislative changes are good. So that's putting a bit of, you know, that sort of legislation pressure on our employers to actually provide safe working environments for all staff and students. But it's got to go deeper than that. And I think when we're talking about, one of our recommendations is to develop a strategy within your own organisation, which is specifically focused on sexual and gender harassment. Coming back to sort of the conversations about students being part of co-design, it also needs to have co-design with underrepresented groups. So not just women, but also international people, those where English is a second language. It's really critical to get the diversity of viewpoints in the development of any type of strategy. And I think our organisations are starting to better understand the importance of that co-design. And then with that is just that open transparency. We need to be able to have those conversations. And I guess then hopefully what would flow on from that is reporting will actually occur if systems are in place. Then we actually have true, authentic data that we can then report on. And then following from that, then maybe we start to see a decline. Because what we are struggling with at the moment is we do know that it is prevalent in our sector, but we actually don't have a true understanding of what the rates are across the sector. We can extrapolate from the data that we do have, but it's a significant proportion.
And I'll just add one comment then on this, which is also to recognise, I think we all do, the desperate need to improve sexual education in our schools, especially around consent and respectful relationships. And I think I was very interested to read some reporting in the Senate inquiry of research that's been done in partnership with La Trobe University. And a really, I thought, very concerning statistic that among young people in teenage years up to the age of 18, 40% have experienced an unwanted sexual experience. So there's clearly a lot of work that we need to do in our society. But again, I really welcome the challenge in the draft action plan that universities be at the forefront of working with other partners to lead social and cultural change.
Now we've got something up the back, is that right?
We do, thank you. This is a question that was submitted via our virtual platform. Mary, you mentioned that a new regulatory approach was adopted by TEQSA. What was outlined today is a welcome shift from TEQSA, but when can we expect it to take effect? And will TEQSA be doing more engagement, as not everyone who would be involved in this change is here today?
Thank you, that's a great question. So this is good. We've talked in the past about the fact that TEQSA, as part of our sort of obligations, are reviewing both our approach to risk, but also how we bring that to our work. And I guess this is a really clear demonstration that we recognise that that the nature and extent of risks is not the same for all providers. That ought to, and the strength of assurance and risk management varies between providers and over time. So we've chosen re-registration and course re-accreditation, which I didn't talk about today, as key opportunities to start to test how we can best work with providers to bring their activities around risk management and self-assurance into the process. We've chosen to focus on those in part because, as many of you would know, the pushing out of some of the due dates for reassessment during COVID means that many providers are coming up to reassessment in the next sort of 12 to 24 months. So the timing is really good to concentrate on those particular processes. Rather than consult on that as a concept, we decided in the first instance to test it in action and to actually build that approach live with feedback and engagement from providers. I don't know if there are any here today who might want to speak about their experience of that process, but certainly we have been fine-tuning that we're getting a range of really positive and constructive feedback from providers about where we can further improve the process, but also the difference that it is making for them. So, in this instance, our approach has been to sort of try and firm up and test to some extent that in practice, but it is certainly something that we will, today was a good taster in the context of sharing with you one of the reasons why it's so important to really emphasise this part of your work, but also to kind of foreshadow the further work that we'll be doing. The other thing that I'll add, which is obviously relevant to many of you, is that really this takes us into the territory of being able to be more risk-tiered in our approach. And you will have picked up that, based on the information that we receive from providers, where that is really strong and comprehensive and the work around managing those risks is well evidenced and mature, that will lead to providers being managed in a simple assessment pathway. Where there are particular problems or issues, the approach is less mature, or providers don't have evidence to demonstrate the effectiveness of those assurance activities, then there'll be a more complex, a more intensive assessment process. So obviously over time, there are real advantages for providers about this risk-tiered approach, but it's also one that will allow us to reflect these changes, this kind of sensitising of the approach in our cost recovery model. So that will also come forward as part of our work here and our consultation in cost recovery.
Now we have a question at the front.
Hi, my name is Hang and I'm from UWA. So I understand that there's still that under-report about harassment in higher education, and I realized that sometimes we just don't understand what is harassment, and sometimes it just, all of the examples for sexual harassment is very physical. How about the cases that in a gray area, for instance, receiving text messages or compliment about good body, or hot girls should drink hot drinks from a person with higher title, and sometimes when a person decides to make a decision, they will, is that the magnitude isn't enough? Or if I go report, they will ask me more like 1, more like 10, or more like 100. So I think, how do we define when should we report? And the second question is I think right now we don't have the guidance for how can we navigate the relationship post-report, because eventually we're still in the same place with the same people. So there are two questions, the magnitude and how to navigate post-report. Thank you.
Excellent questions. So in response to your first one, it's education. It really is. And I think we assume it's the worst case scenario when we talk about sexual or gender harassment. We think we're talking about rape or anything, as bad as that. But it's actually, it starts small. It's the comments. It's the, gender-based comments. It's the race-based comments. It's all of those. And so I think there's a really big need for that education component that is required, not only for those who are experiencing the harassment, but also for those who are doing the harassing, so that they understand that that is part of harassment and it's part of that spectrum. The second part of your question is a really difficult one, and it's one that we've grappled with as well. And it is how do you deal with the person that you are still working with after you have made a complaint, and there's no best practice for this yet. And so the examples that we have been able to obtain through our research and analysis is that there's opportunities for confidential reporting, so that the individual doesn't know that it's coming from you. Is that right or is that wrong? It's a grey area there. But I think we have to start somewhere about reporting to occur, and what leadership really needs to be able to do is to show what it is, what are the disciplinary actions for that type of behaviour, and so that it's not just swept under the rug. And so there's different types of disciplinary action for the different types of behaviour, and so that's what we need to collectively, I think, as a ecosystem, to try to provide guidance and support about what does that look like, because it's a new territory for all of us. And so I think, going back to Theo's comment, we will fail. but hopefully we will get some learnings from the failures that we go through. But and through that process, we hope that the failure is not a significant impact on those who are affected.
That was wonderful. I'm conscious that we're getting very close to lunch, but we've got one more question over here.
Yes. So I'm student of SASTC, Bachelor of IT. I have heard points mentioned by Mary to improve better student experience and self-assurance. My question is directly related to usage of AI in education system. So my question is, like, it's well said by someone, AI can't replace someone from job, person with AI skills can. So my question is, like, if AI can be promoted by TEQSA to be used in education system in creative ways to improve prompting skills and to boost up the speed of students, so that it can't be like if AI generated content can't be determined as like negative, if there is a lot of self-involvement in that.
Thank you. I'll have a go at that one. I don't think the answer exists in full yet to that question. There was a lot of great discussion in the seminars yesterday about artificial intelligence, about trying to navigate the path between tapping into the benefits and the opportunities of AI, but also managing for the risks. And part of that conversation was recognising that the capability to effectively assess and use AI in many areas of work, post-tertiary education, is that it's a capability that graduates will need to have. From TEQSA's perspective, and I'm going to quote Helen Ganil here, the opportunities for AI is not our department. We recognise that there are many people, students and staff in higher education, who are far better qualified to sort of see the possibilities and how that might be explored. The real focus for us is that there's going to be an ongoing need to really attend to the risks that it poses to assessment. So, how can AI be managed? And there's lots of really interesting thinking coming through about this, but in a way that the assessment can be designed to ensure that by the end of someone's study, the provider and the wider community knows that there's been trustworthy assessment that confirms that a student has achieved the learning and developed the capabilities that they need. So it's going to be a really, really difficult balancing act. But I don't see anyone realistically saying at the moment that the answer to that is just to stop the use of AI, even if that could happen. It's more about how to balance that with the risks and make sure that in the end, graduates have the learning and the capability on board, not just that is required for their degree overall, but probably in terms of their professional lives, to properly understand and ethically manage the risks around this technology.
And that will be our last question. So can you join me in thanking Mary and our panel? And now it's lunchtime.
Okay, it's 1:45, everyone.